The first thing I noticed wasn't the noise. It was the shadow. I stepped onto my back porch early one morning with a cup of coffee, and something felt wrong. The sunlight that usually hit the far corner of my yard was gone. A dark shape stretched across the grass where the morning light should have been. At first, I thought maybe a tree had fallen overnight. Then I walked a little closer, and that's when I saw it. A wooden structure, tall, fresh lumber, half-built railing, standing right in the corner of my backyard. For a moment, my brain refused to process what I was looking at. I blinked twice, stepped closer, and stared at the posts drilled straight into the ground, inside my property line. My neighbor had built a deck, on my land. I turned slowly toward the fence and saw him standing there in his yard with a tape measure hanging from his belt. Bradley Knox, my HOA neighbor. And judging by the calm look on his face, he had absolutely no intention of pretending this was a mistake. He waved at me like we were discussing the weather. "Morning, Caleb." I looked back at the deck posts buried in my grass, then at him. "You built this in my yard." Bradley shrugged like I'd just pointed out a cloud in the sky. Property lines can be confusing. That was the moment I realized this wasn't confusion. It was a test. And Bradley thought I was the kind of person who would fail it. What he didn't know was that 3 weeks earlier, when he started asking weird questions about the fence line and yard dimensions, I had already pulled my property survey, called the county records office, and installed 2 security cameras pointed directly at the corner he had just invaded. By the time that deck was finished, I had everything I needed to tear it down in court. But standing there that morning, looking at lumber sitting on land my father had bought 30 years earlier, I felt something darker than anger settle into my chest. Because nothing changes the way you see your home faster than realizing someone next door believes they can simply take a piece of it. My name is Caleb Turner, and the house I live in outside Boise, Idaho, has been in my family longer than most of the houses around it have even existed. My father bought the place in 1993 when the whole area was still farmland and gravel roads. Over time, subdivisions grew around us until our property became a strange island surrounded by HOA neighborhoods with matching mailboxes and identical fences. The biggest one was called Silver Ridge Estates. That's where Bradley Knox lived. Bradley moved in about a year before the deck appeared. He was the kind of man who spoke confidently about everything, even when he clearly didn't know what he was talking about. Always in golf shirts, always carrying a clipboard, always mentioning HOA community standards like they were federal law. The first time he mentioned my land was about 6 months after he moved in. He leaned over the fence while I was mowing and said, "You ever double-check where your back boundary actually sits?" I shut off the mower. "It's where the survey says it is." He smiled like he knew something I didn't. Sometimes those old surveys are optimistic. At the time, I thought he was just being annoying. Now I know he was laying the groundwork. The strange activity started a few weeks later. First came the little orange survey flags. They appeared one morning near the back corner of my yard. They weren't official. No county tag, no markings, just cheap hardware store flags pushed into the dirt. I pulled them out and tossed them in the trash. The next day they were back. Only this time they were further inside my property. That's when I installed cameras. One facing the back corner, one covering the fence line. 2 days later I caught Bradley on video, stepping through a loose fence panel at 6:12 in the morning, pushing those flags deeper into my yard. I remember sitting at the kitchen table watching that clip 3 times. Not angry yet, just confused. Because you have to reach a certain level of arrogance to walk onto someone's property and start marking territory like you own it. But Bradley wasn't done. A week later, construction materials showed up in his yard. Stacks of treated lumber, concrete bags, deck railing. I walked over and asked him what he was building. "Patio extension," he said casually. "Where?" He pointed toward the back corner. "The same corner where those flags kept appearing." "That's my property line," I told him. Bradley tilted his head slightly. "We'll see." That phrase bothered me all night. "We'll see." Not, "You're wrong," not, "I checked." Just the kind of casual dismissal someone gives when they believe the argument is already won. The next morning, the construction started, and 3 days later, the deck posts appeared in my yard. When I confronted him, Bradley didn't even bother denying it. "The survey I have shows the line further back," he said. "You don't have a survey." He smiled. "Then I guess the court can decide." I stared at him for a long moment. "Why would you build something before confirming the boundary?" He leaned on the fence like we were discussing landscaping. "Because once it's there, it becomes harder to remove." That was when I understood the whole plan. He wasn't confused. He was gambling. If the deck stayed long enough, if the structure looked permanent enough, if enough HOA members supported him, maybe I'd give up the fight. Maybe I'd accept the new boundary. Maybe I'd avoid the legal mess and just let him have the corner. Unfortunately for Bradley, he made one critical mistake. He assumed I didn't have proof. The footage from my cameras told the entire story. Bradley placing fake markers, Bradley entering my yard, Bradley measuring and drilling posts, Bradley laughing with a contractor while pointing at the corner like he'd just conquered it. I took everything to a property attorney named Laura Bennett. She watched the footage in silence. Then she leaned back and said something that made me feel better instantly. He built a permanent structure on land he knew wasn't his. That bad? Laura smiled. Oh, it's worse than bad. The case moved quickly. The court ordered a licensed survey before the hearing. The surveyor arrived 3 days later with GPS equipment and boundary records dating back to the original farmland division. The result was not even close. Bradley's deck wasn't just slightly over the line. It was 9 feet inside my property. 9 feet. That meant his entire deck corner sat on land he had no legal right to touch. But Bradley still didn't back down. When the hearing day arrived, he showed up in a navy blazer looking like he was attending a business conference. His lawyer tried to argue boundary confusion. But then Laura played the video. The courtroom watched Bradley move the fake flags. The judge watched Bradley step through my fence. The judge watched Bradley drill posts into ground he had already been warned was mine. By the time the video ended, the judge looked furious. Actually furious. He leaned forward and asked Bradley one question. Did you knowingly construct this structure before confirming the property boundary? Bradley hesitated. Just long enough. The judge slammed his hand on the bench. You built on land that was clearly disputed and hoped the court would reward your gamble. The silence in that room was heavy enough to feel. Then came the order. Bradley had 30 days to remove the deck entirely, at his own expense. He also had to restore the property and cover my legal fees. The judge's final words were simple. This court does not reward people for taking land that doesn't belong to them. 3 weeks later, the deck was gone. All that remained was bare dirt where his posts had stood. I replanted grass in that corner and replaced the fence panel he had broken. Sometimes when I walk past that spot in the evening, I still remember the first morning I saw that shadow stretching across my yard. Bradley thought he could build first and argue later. Instead, he built the evidence that destroyed him. And when the judge finally saw the truth, he was furious. How did you like the story? Subscribe to my YouTube channel